So we're off to a good start. If I may ask John now to, would you like to make some remarks, John? Or
yes, sure.
Okay. And then we'll go to Mario and Hannes, and then we'll have discussion. So please.
Okay, well, I won't. I think the position of the Conservatives, and I count the ECR parties as the conservative, the leading conservative group now in European politics. Of course, in Britain, which is not a member of the European Union, the Tory party remains a very important party, and it cooperates generally with the ECR parties in the Council of Europe, no longer, of course, being in the EU. Now, why do I say that? Because after all, the EPP is the largest group of centre-right parties in the European Parliament, and it is in fact in effective coalition with the Socialists, the Liberals and the Greens, and they now they have a large majority, though they may lose parts of that large majority in the next election to give the ECR parties a blocking minority, which would be highly significant in European politics, though it doesn't sound very dramatic. But the reality of the underlying political reality of the situation is that over a period of time, the EPP parties expanded to the left and ceased to really be the carrier of conservative ideas and policies. I don't say that in every respect, of course. They didn't change overnight into a left-wing party. But they did cease to really represent conservative voters over a wide range of issues. In Germany itself, that produced, for example, what was called the social democratization of the Christian Democrats, the consequences of which were that under Angela Merkel's leadership, the EPP, the CDU-CSU coalition went from approximately 42–43% of the vote in elections to really 22%. Now, I think that was an exaggerated fall because of at the last election, but it represented a serious long-term shrinkage. The same is true for other centre-right parties. I mentioned in this morning's talk that the Conservative Party had, for a while, lost votes dramatically to what was in effect what's called a far-right party, by which is meant simply a more conservative party, called the Brexit Party and UKIP. Well, they regained them in the last election. As a result, by pursuing genuinely conservative policies, they managed to expand the share of the vote and actually to get a significant majority in the British Parliament. A significant majority which, by the way, as you all know, was squandered by the last Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson. I think squandered partly for good reasons, well, not exactly for good reasons, but understandable ones. Namely, he was blown off course by the COVID pandemic. But also, he lost ground because he really had no fixed idea, no clear idea of what he wanted to do in order to achieve what he called the making Britain global Britain. That implied a willingness to diverge from the economic policies of the European Union more sharply, and he wasn't really prepared to do that, as well as being, as I say, preoccupied by COVID. So it squandered that election gain, and now the party has just embarked on a new course. And equally, as I say, you have the EPP parties in the coalition, in the European Parliament, in Germany and elsewhere, which And I quoted, I think, Pierre Manon before, saying that in France, the left-wing parties had abandoned the class coalition in favor of Europe, and the same had been true for the conservative parties. They had abandoned their national clientele in the course of becoming more European. Now, I think that may be my phone, which I've proved I just cannot turn it off. I don't know how it can be done, but if you can do it, you're a better man than I am, Mario. Okay. Now, what does it mean to be a conservative in the sense I'm using it with, and the sense that I believe the ECR parties are conservative? I think ultimately it comes down to being realistic about what the challenges facing you are and what the remedies you choose are capable of achieving. I'm a little nervous. I'll take the example of the latest economic policies pursued by the new Conservative government under Liz Truss. I'm a little nervous. Why? Because on the one hand, I think that her microeconomic policies are sensible. She's trying to remove obstacles to growth, to allow companies which are entrepreneurial to expand. And I think that that's very sensible. The macroeconomic policies, the financial policies, that seems to me to be taking a risk. What is the risk? The risk is that if you, as they have done, if you cut taxes and you have already built up massive borrowing, there is only one way really that you can say you're not taking a big risk. And that is if you simultaneously cut public spending. Why do I say that? Because if you cut public spending, then the money that you are spending to cut taxes, and in a way, a government spends money, in principle at least, when it cuts taxes. If the money you are using to cut taxes can be justified as a transfer from inefficient state spending to more productive private spending, you are paying for your tax cuts by cuts in public spending. And that is not a part of the new government's policy. Now, how do they intend to make up for that? Well, they intend to make up for it by achieving economic growth. And this is why the policies, this has been tried 3 times. This is the 3rd occasion in which we tried this in the last 30 or 40 years. The first was under Ted Heath, the first was under Hal Macmillan and Reggie Maudling in 63, 64. The second was under Edward Heath in 74, and this is the 3rd. It's called a dash for growth. But as I say, growth is not itself a policy, it's an aspiration. And if you don't get that growth, you don't get the increased revenue that will fund the tax cuts. So I'm nervous that the government is not pursuing a realistic policy. Now, we know that the governments under Merkel and CDU did not pursue realistic policies in 2 regards. First of all, they ignored the dangers of increasing their dependence on Russian energy and putting themselves at the mercy of Russia in the event that policies that Russia would invade other countries, as it did in 2009 in Georgia, and as it did again in 2014 in eastern Ukraine. The second policy was that they did not spend money on defense. So you put yourself at risk from a potentially aggressive neighbor, Russia, which has shown its willingness to break the rules of international conduct twice, in 2009 and 2014, and at the same time You don't prepare for a situation in which you might be involved in conflict. Donald Trump is often reckoned to be an unrealistic politician. But the fact is, when he came to Europe in 2016, he warned all Europeans, but particularly Germany, that they would have to resolve those two issues. They would have to get away from economic dependence on Russian energy, and they would have to build up their spending on NATO defense. There's a famous video tape, which you may have seen, in which he's making those remarks, and the German delegation is laughing at him in a kind of contemptuous way. Well, there are many faults with Donald Trump, but on those two key issues, he was more realistic than they were. So, as I say, realism, namely understanding what are the problems and the risks, and secondly, taking prudent, measured policies to resolve them, are a key to conservative statesmanship. We don't believe in over-ambitious policies that aren't rooted in a kind of reality. That's why when Mrs. Thatcher faced the same kind of economic problem as the present British government under Liz Truss in 1981, she actually temporarily increased taxes. She didn't cut them. It wasn't an ideological decision. And if you read her book, to which Robin and I helped her write, you will find that there is a fascinating blow-by-blow account of how different people at the top of British governments look seriously at the constantly changing economic situation in order to work out which was the best policy. Now, the one hope that Liz Truss must have here is that what happened to Margaret Thatcher was she no sooner launched that 1981 budget than it was condemned by 385 economists in a letter to the Times. After that point, as if that had been an endorsement of her policy, the British economy started a boom that lasted about 25 years. Now, Liz Truss must hope the same thing in this case. I hope it too. But my own view is that it is better to embark on an economic policy that has solid roots in economic reality and not in hopes and aspirations, because sooner or later, if you don't base it in reality, the markets will rebuke you. You might as well start by basing it in reality. So in defense, in economic policy, and I would say in these days, in matters such as free speech and gender ideology, the essence of conservatism is realism, a realistic assessment of everything from human nature to cost accounting in economics. If we stick by that, we won't go very far wrong. And one of the reasons I'm so happy to be talking to a conference which is composed of ECR parties is I believe that that is their character, which they may make occasional mistakes, but if their character is based in reality, they will generally get it right. Thank you.